Every great success story has a beginning and an end. But some don't just fade away. They unravel, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but regret. This is the story of a car that was supposed to change the game, a bold new idea that turned into one of the biggest missteps in automotive history. By the late 1960s, General Motors was untouchable. Their cars ruled American roads, outselling the competition year after year. But something was changing. Small, fuel-efficient imports were flooding in, and for the first time, GM had no real answer. One man was determined to change that. Ed Cole, GM's executive vice president, had a vision, an American-built subcompact that could take on the imports. It had to be modern, efficient, and most importantly, it had to be ready fast. And so in record time, General Motors created the car they believed would take on the world. It was sleek. It was lightweight. It was unlike anything they had built before. It was the Chevrolet Vega, and it was about to become a disaster. Cole pitched his idea in 1967, and GM approved it almost immediately. The project was given the codename XP877, and Chevrolet was tasked with bringing it to life. Engineers and designers got to work creating an all-new inline four-cylinder engine with a lightweight aluminum block and a striking, futuristic design. The name was carefully chosen, Vega, inspired by one of the brightest stars in the night sky. But there was one problem. Normally, a new car took 4 years to develop. Chevrolet had just 2. That meant cutting corners. That meant skipping extensive testing. That meant launching a car before it was truly ready. A world beater in 24 months. What could possibly go wrong? On September 10, 1970, the Chevrolet Vega hit dealerships across America. It looked like a hit. The car was sleek, affordable, and came in multiple body styles. A 2-door hatchback, a notchback, a wagon, and even a sedan delivery. Customers loved the styling, and the press was impressed. Motor Trend even named it Car of the Year in 1971. But behind the showroom excitement, trouble was brewing. The rush to production had consequences. Engineers had warned about weaknesses, but with GM executives focused on speed, many of those warnings went unheard. The Vega had barely hit the streets when problems started surfacing.
A very sporty little car, but also very practical.
Small ones at first, then bigger ones. What started as a promising future would soon become one of the biggest disasters in GM history. They called it the car line management technique. Instead of the usual fragmented process, where different teams worked separately, Chevrolet put one chief engineer in charge of the entire program. A dedicated group of 50 engineers was split into specialized teams, one for the body, one for the powertrain, another for the chassis, and even a team specifically responsible for pleasability. That meant they were constantly checking cars on the assembly line, watching for issues in real time. Computers were even brought in to help track quality control, something that was practically unheard of at the time. In October 1968, the first version of the Vega was shockingly basic. There was only one body style, a notchback sedan. It had a single engine option, a 2-speed torque drive automatic transmission, and the interior was stripped to the bone. A bench seat, rubber floor covering, no glove box, no headliner, and absolutely no air conditioning. It was as bare bones as it got, but as market trends shifted, so did the car. Within just 3 months, Chevrolet threw out the original plan and expanded the lineup. Hatchback, wagon, and panel delivery models were added. More comfort features crept in. Bucket seats became standard and ventilation was improved. The L11 2-barrel engine was introduced, and while GM expected it to make up just 20% of sales, it ended up being the preferred choice for 75% of buyers. Then came another wave of last-minute changes. By early 1969, Chevrolet was scrambling to refine the Vega. More transmission choices were added, including 3- and 4-speed manuals from Opel, and a 2-speed Powerglide automatic. The fuel system was completely redesigned, making the Vega the first GM vehicle to feature an in-tank electric fuel pump, a move that put it ahead of its time. Engineers also made improvements to the suspension, added wider tyres, and offered an adjustable seatback, something that nearly half of Vega buyers opted for. With the launch date rapidly approaching, GM kept tweaking. A heated rear window was added, along with a sporty GT package that quickly became a popular upgrade. By the summer of 1969, the final production model was locked in. The first Vegas rolled off the assembly line on June 26, 1970. Then, disaster. Just as production was ramping up, the national GM strike hit. From September to November 1970, assembly lines shut down, and when things finally restarted, Chevrolet was left scrambling. Some last-minute tweaks had to be made, and bright roof mouldings were even shipped directly to dealerships so they could be installed on already built cars. On the surface, it looked like the Vega had gone through a careful, well-planned development process. But the reality was much different. Critical testing had been rushed. Issues that should have been caught at proving grounds were being discovered by customers instead. Chevrolet had used the buying public as their final round of quality control. By 1974, the industry was catching on. One publication put it bluntly. Tests which should have been at the proving grounds were performed by customers, necessitating numerous piecemeal fixes by dealers. Chevrolet's Bright Star received an enduring black eye despite a continuing development program, which eventually alleviated most of these initial shortcomings. The Vega was already gaining a reputation, not as GM's next great success, but as one of the most rushed and problematic cars they had ever built. And the worst was yet to come. Next, we dive into what really went wrong: the rust issues, the engine failures, and the reputation that General Motors would never live down. The Chevrolet Vega may have started strong in sales, but it didn't take long for buyers to question its quality, and for good reason. From the very beginning, engineers struggled to keep the car from falling apart. During early testing at GM's proving grounds, the front end of the Vega completely separated after just 8 miles, forcing engineers to rush in 20 pounds of extra reinforcements just to meet durability standards. That was just the beginning. By 1972, Chevrolet issued 3 massive recalls, exposing just how serious the Vega's flaws were. The biggest recall covered 500,000 cars, targeting a range of dangerous mechanical failures, defective axles, throttle issues, and even fire hazards. The first recall, affecting 130,000 cars, addressed an issue where engine backfires could rupture the muffler, overheating the fuel tank until it expanded, cracked, and ignited. If that sounds terrifying, it was. But the nightmare didn't stop there. The second recall hit 350,000 Vegas with a single-barrel carburetor. A part in the emission control system could fall into the throttle linkage, jamming it wide open. Chevrolet's solution? Telling owners that if their throttle got stuck while driving, they should turn off the ignition and brake until the car stopped. Not exactly a reassuring fix. Then came the third and most alarming recall. In July 1972, 526,000 vehicles had a rear axle defect so severe that it could cause the entire axle and wheels to detach from the car. If that happened, the Vega would drop onto its rear suspension, leaving the driver with no control. By May 1972, 6 out of every 7 Vegas built had been recalled. Chevrolet scrambled to make improvements, issuing fixes year after year, but the damage was already done. The Vega wasn't just unreliable, it was dangerous. By 1976, Chevrolet claimed to have made 300 more improvements. The front grille, headlights, and taillights were updated with corrosion-resistant materials. The Dura-built engine received cooling and durability upgrades, and the chassis was strengthened with Monza-derived suspension and larger brakes. To combat its rust issues, Chevrolet finally introduced galvanized fenders and rocker panels. Special editions like the GT Estate Wagon, Cabriolet Notchback, and Nomad Wagon were introduced, while the Cosworth Vega was cancelled in July after only 1,446 units were built. By 1977, the Vega was running on fumes. The Notchback was renamed the Coupe, and the 3-speed manual transmission was dropped. The GT model got a blacked-out sporty trim package, but beyond that, there were few updates. The once promising Vega was quietly phased out at the end of the year, bringing GM's grand experiment to an unceremonious end. Today, the Vega is remembered both as an innovative car ahead of its time and as a symbol of what happens when aggressive cost-cutting and corporate pressure overshadow quality control. Enthusiasts still appreciate well-preserved models, but its legacy remains a lesson in the importance of thorough testing, durability, and long-term reliability in automotive design.